Back to school time is when many families first recognize the signs of sensory issues in their kiddos, noticing that they're easily overwhelmed by transitions, new environments, and sometimes struggle to stay calm and just regulate. And while summer is supposed to be a fun way to get outside and enjoy all those fun activities, such as like swimming, fairs, fishing, concerts, you name it, sometimes what can happen is it can lead to a rough start to the school year. And we all know how not so kiddo friendly those activities can be. Sometimes when it comes to food choices, right? Whether it's the gluten, the dairy, all the dyes, not to mention just all that added sugar when you go to those fairs and concerts. It's really no wonder why we can have a hard time getting back into our daily routine because all those extra inflammatory foods are just really more triggering. And none of these things, none of those foods necessarily help support a nervous system that may already be running on overdrive. And sadly, these sensory struggles aren't just for a few families here and there. As of today, 1 in 6 kids with sensory processing disorder, or SPD, have various challenges each and every day. Their nervous system struggles to filter and regulate normal input, leaving them in a constant state of sensory overload. And also, what can happen is sometimes pediatricians often dismiss the parents' concerns, saying it's just a phase or they're going to grow out of it. But the truth is, early intervention is really crucial for kiddos that have issues like SPD to thrive. And even more importantly, those interventions must address the root cause of SPD, not just recommend workarounds that may be helpful, but also not even, sometimes sustainable. So kind of like what we mentioned before, SPD affects about 1 in 6 children, with numbers continually on the rise. And despite this prevalence, it is frequently overlooked or often misunderstood by some of our healthcare providers. And so while SPD often co-occurs with other infant conditions or kiddo conditions such as autism spectrum disorder, they are very distinct conditions and they're actually quite different. Children with sensory challenges may exhibit age-appropriate skills in some areas while struggling with pronounced sensory-based difficulties in others. So one of our favorite ways kiddos with these struggles start to show signs of change in nervous system regulation is often when we hear the parents sharing stories that they might not even realize that their kiddo is healing because they're like, hey, Billy started to try some new foods. And then it's like, well, have they done that before? And like, actually, no. Like, it's kind of a cool aha moment when we have families that have started care, how they noticing these little subtle changes that their body and their nervous system are getting more regulated. Another one would be like the ear, depending upon what kind of SPD we have. Sometimes they're very auditory, sensory, and it's like very triggering in a lot of scenarios. We've heard of families where it's like, hey, we didn't need to do noise cancellation or any of those earphones. And that's wonderful, awesome signs of healing and change. So I'm going to go into some of the signs, some of the most common signs of sensory processing disorder in kiddos. So kind of what I just touched on, oversensitivity to touch, food sensations, clothes, sights, sounds, smells, and foods. They can have discomfort with certain textures. They might not want to be touched, or sometimes they get overwhelmed with certain fabrics being on them. And then kind of like what I touched on, just really loud stimuli that like noises, even like hand dryers at the bathroom. Those are some of the sensory inputs. And so sometimes what we have is sensory seekers who are constantly trying to get those tactile sensations or engaging in more rough play. On the other side, sometimes we have avoidance of sensory input. So avoiding activities that involve the physical contact. So they hate hugs or they get overwhelmed with things like teeth brushing or haircuts or just new environments. That's the sensory avoidance. Another one is difficulty with fine motor skills. So they struggle or have challenges with buttoning clothes or using utensils or writing. Another variant we can see is difficulty with gross motor skills. So problems with activities such as like the running, jumping, riding a bike, they just have really off kind of coordination, which is another kind of issue that we can also see is tripping, falling, or just very clumsy. That's another sign of a sensory thing. And one other is poor body or spatial awareness. So they tend to feel like they aren't aware of where they are in space as much. They tend to bump into people or things a whole lot. Another one that I kind of touched on earlier too is overwhelmed with crowded places. So it's just there's too many people present and or it's too loud. They struggle with those. Um, Another one we can see is the transitions where they have an issue with this schedule changing, that school transition. They just really struggle. It's almost like you have to fight them to get them to do these new tasks, which also can lead to those big emotional outbursts when they are transitioning. It's something that they can really struggle with. Another sign is difficulty with self-soothing or calming, when it's something where like we want kiddos to be equipped and help regulate, but they just have a really tough time doing that. That's another form that can be a SPD related. Um, Another one that we can also see is difficulty sleeping. They have a tough time falling asleep or staying asleep because their mind just keeps running and racing and they just can't slow down. There's other signs of poor attention span, so difficulty staying on task, focus. They get easily distracted by sensory stimuli. Um, and last but not least, we can see the like repetitive behaviors. So they engage in that repetition, motion, or action as a way to self-soothe, or manage kind of sensory input. And so what's really going on here is that it's kind of a three-part process. So first, the sensory input comes in through the sensory nerves and the sensory aspect of the spinal cord, reading information from both the internal, the body, and then the external environments. Second, the brain and central nervous system must process or interpret sensory information and determine what is important to pay attention to and react to, and what is not important and should be kind of filtered out and essentially kind of ignored. Third, the brain and the nervous system then send that information and what are called actions or impulses out to the various parts of the brain and body to react and respond to the incoming sensory input. And so what happens is when the sensory nerve pathways into the brain and the nervous system are altered and interfered with, the brain and the nervous system then receive bad or kind of garbage in, or jumbled up information, and in turn that leads to poor decision making or interpretation. And then finally you get like a bad and inappropriate actions plus outputs, because you have kind of that, for lack of better terms, garbage in, so you get garbage out. So when you have bad information coming in, it leads to bad information getting processed and coming out. And so the main emphasis here is that it's a neurosensory communication plus connection problem. And so what we call as chiropractors, we're looking for subluxation or nervous system dysregulation or disconnect happening. And so once you understand what a subluxation and nervous system dysregulation is, then parents can really start to understand a little bit more of what some of the root causes of SPD is. And so what we aim to do is, in our office, we do some scans and we talk about ways that we are seeing that disconnect happen. And so this is some different kind of training and data measurements that we use that not many traditional medical offices or pediatricians have a grasp on or have the tools to measure that. And secondly, no traditional medicine testing or even movement therapies like PT or OT also have the tools and ways to measure how this nervous system is dysregulated, how much dysregulation is going on, what's it going to take to help kind of reset and rebuild that foundation. And so while the root cause of sensory processing disorder may escape most common medical diagnostic testing, here at our office, we do neurological insight scans that are literally designed to find subluxation, nervous system dysregulation plus dysfunction, and also help parents to see with their own eyes what exactly is causing their child's frequent tantrums, meltdowns, and sensory difficulties. So if you're feeling like you've already done months or maybe even years of PT, OT, primary care, and just seems like these workarounds are just absorbing a lot of your daily life, and still kind of feeling like your plateau just not getting the way that you want things to progress, we would love to educate you and inform you more about how our office operates with neurologically focused chiropractic care. And so this specialized form of chiropractic care is something that we provide here at Live and Hope. And it can do so much for kiddos struggling with sensory issues. Help your kid find, and your family actually, find a more holistic approach to get to an easier, calmer, more consistent quality of life and transitions. It doesn't have to be a struggle to get back to school rhythm and routine. There's hope and there's help that you guys can do. So to learn more or schedule an appointment, simply just visit a link in our bio, leave us a comment, or even send us a DM to get connected with one of our care advocates. And we would love to see how we can help connect with you guys.